Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for a friend. Following the end of World War II, most of the young men who had fought in the war returned to their hometowns, got jobs, and started families. This was certainly true of the place where I lived, a small farm and timber community in the northwest corner of the Florida Panhandle called Nokomis. Many of these young returning veterans took jobs at Ingalls Shipyard in Pascagoula, Mississippi, a driving distance of about 100 miles west of Atmore, Alabama, on State Highway 90. On February 22nd, 1929, my father's oldest sister, Agnes Albritton, married a local Nokomis fellow named Grady Hollingsworth. Grady was 18 at the time. He was the oldest of 10 Hollingsworth children, born to Andrew Jackson Hollingsworth and Essie James. Aunt Agnes, as we always called her, was just 17. She was the oldest of 8 children, born to Marion Hubbard Albritton and Julia Victoria Barlow. My father, Marion Howard, we called him Bud Albritton, was the 6th born in the Albritton family of the Albritton siblings and the only son. So he had 7 sisters to kind of dote on him. Born in 1924, Bud was only 5 years old when his oldest sister, Agnes, married Grady Hollingsworth. Grady took a job working at Ingalls Shipyard soon after it was established in 1938 to build U.S. Navy ships for the war effort. By the time World War II ended in 1945, Grady had become the number 2 man in charge of the entire shipyard, right behind Robert Ingersoll Ingalls Sr. himself. Consequently, Grady used his influence to give jobs to a great many young men returning from the war and seeking civilian employment, especially his kinfolk from around Nokomis. Building ships was hard work, but it paid well. Owing to his highly compensated job supervising the construction of ships for the U.S. government, Uncle Grady was able to acquire several hundred acres of farmland back home in Nokomis, which kept his wife and children pretty busy growing crops and raising cows while he worked long hours at the shipyard, often requiring him to live away from home during the work weeks. Sometime in the early 1930s, a strange development occurred in the Hollingsworth household. Grady, ever a pious and gracious Christian man, had built a small church there in Nokomis where community members could come and worship. He named the little church Antioch, named after the New Testament town where Jesus' disciples were first called Christians, found in Acts 11 and 26. Just a few years following construction of the church, a certain Mrs. Lemon showed up during one of their revival meetings and declared herself to be a traveling preacher. Mrs. Lemon was accompanied by her young son, a toddler named William Charles Lemon, who she called Junior. Grady invited the young woman to preach to his little Antioch congregation, and when the revival was ended, Mrs. Lemon told Grady that that there were several more church congregations in the area where she was scheduled to preach. She asked Agnes and Grady if she could leave her young son with them for a couple of weeks until she could fulfill her speaking engagements, and then she would return and retrieve him. Now, in those desperate early days of the Great Depression, many itinerant people drifted to and fro across the nation searching for work and food, and such requests were not at all unusual. Agnes and Grady agreed to keep the child, and they took him home with them. Junior quickly became a full-fledged member of the Hollingsworth family. His new custodians fed him, they clothed him, and they loved him as if he were one of their own. In the meanwhile, Junior's mother never returned. Several years passed. In February of 1931, Agnes gave birth to a son, Dewey, followed by a daughter, Doris, in October of 1932. Two more sons followed, Martin in 1935 and Winston in 1937. Now, we don't know exactly what happened in terms of Junior's arrival. We don't know if he was just an infant or if he were a toddler or if he was 3 or 4 years old. But according to the reports, investigations within the family, I tell this as I believe it was. He was pretty much a toddler, in which case his brother Dewey and his sister Doris would not have arrived yet. Nevertheless, there's some question about that. They may have already been on the ground, and this could have been after 1931 or 32, but as best I can learn, it was in the early 1930s sometime. So in any event, Aunt Agnes had the children, the other children other than Junior, Dewey, Doris, Martin, and Winston in 1937. Then sometime around 1935 to 1937, I'd say, another stranger appeared at the Hollingsworth farm, not Junior's mother, but an older woman, declaring herself to be the grandmother of the boy, William Charles Lemon, and demanding to take custody of the boy. Having grown emotionally attached to the child and the child to them as well, Grady and Agnes refused to give the child over to the woman. They challenged her claim in court and were subsequently awarded full custody and adoptive rights. Thereby, William Charles Jr. Lemon legally became Junior Hollingsworth. The alleged grandmother left peacefully and was never heard from again. Another son, Robert Floyd, they called him Bob Hollingsworth. Bob was born in 1939, followed by Dorothy in 1941, Donna in 1945, Marvin in 1947, Melba in 1949, and Andy in 1952. Junior, the eldest of the Hollingsworth children, dropped out of high school sometime in the late 1940s. This was not unusual at that time. And so Junior dropped out of high school and went to work for his father at Ingalls Shipyard. He soon met and married a local girl named Bernice Kershaw. Junior and Bernice had 2 daughters together, Rose Marie and Betty, and a son named Charles Arthur. With the military draft accelerating during the Korean War, that was in 1950 to 53 years in there, both Junior, who was now 21, and Dewey, now 19, were eligible for the military draft. Dewey received his draft notice first. This was something of a problem for the Hollingsworth family, since Dewey had assumed a lead role assisting his mother in the operation of the family farm. His duties and farming skills had become quite critical to the family's welfare. Consequently, Grady persuaded Junior to fulfill his brother's military obligation. Junior agreed without hesitation. Grady asked the draft board to exempt Dewey from military service under a special farm exemption and to allow his brother William Charles Jr. Hollingsworth to serve in his place. Junior subsequently served in the U.S. Army for an unspecified period of time, before getting involved with some errant pals in a store robbery. Junior's part in the crime was driving the getaway car, for which he was subsequently sentenced to an unknown period of confinement in the state prison. I'm not sure what state. I think maybe Mississippi. I'm not sure what state it was, but he did serve a little time in prison. And so these events led to a separation and divorce from Bernice and his 3 children. After his release from prison, Junior returned to his shipbuilding job at Ingalls Shipyard. Soon thereafter, he met and married a young Mississippi woman named Gladys Bennett. He and Gladys had 2 daughters named Rose Maureen and Christine Renee, and a son named Bill. Junior Hollingsworth was a tall, handsome, charming young man with thick black hair and a smooth olive complexion. He was possessed of an agreeable personality, a kind and generous nature, and was much beloved by his adoptive parents and all his siblings, as well as by his many friends. Junior didn't embrace his father's strict family religious standards, however, but chose a life of gaiety and excess instead, preferring the freedoms of hunting and fishing and drinking beer with his friends, to what he saw as the austere trappings of a Christian lifestyle. Though his parents disapproved of some of his lifestyle changes and prayed constantly for him to change his ways, they loved him nevertheless for it, and no less. Junior's younger brother, Bob, graduated from high school in 1958. Bob was a big brawny boy and an outstanding athlete with a gregarious personality. As expected, Bob was offered a full college football scholarship at Mississippi Southern State College upon graduation from high school, but he chose instead to marry his high school sweetheart, a pretty cheerleader named Jean Kent, and to go into the ministry. This pleased Bob's entire family immensely, for Bob was a natural, powerful speaker at the pulpit and seemed filled with the Holy Spirit. While preparing for his role as a minister, Bob moved with his young family to Pascagoula and took a job at Ingalls Shipyard, working with his father and his brother, Junior. Filled with zeal for his new calling, Bob began to plead with Junior to come to Christ and to repent of his righteous ways. "Well, I find God in nature," countered Junior, "in the woods and on the rivers. How do you know my way of finding God is not the true way?" he told Bob. Finally, Junior offered his younger brother a deal. He said, "Bob, if you'll go fishing with me, I'll go to church with you. Let's just see which one works best." And so Bob agreed, and they made their plans. Bob was scheduled as a visiting preacher at an upcoming revival event, so he invited Junior to come and hear him preach. Junior agreed. At the same time, Junior had planned a fishing trip on the West Pascagoula River with a fishing buddy of his on Saturday, January the 13th, 1962. Just 1 week before his scheduled church visit to hear his brother preach. Bob agreed to go along. Unfortunately, the small boat from which the 3 men were fishing sprung a leak and began to sink. Junior and his friend, both avid outdoorsmen and strong swimmers, made it through the cold waters to the shoreline. Bob, however, being heavily clad for the bitter cold weather that prevailed on the river waters, was unable to make it to the shoreline. He began to weaken as he swam and called out to his brother for help. Realizing his beloved brother was in trouble, Junior hastily swam back to assist him. But Bob's sheer weight and his frantic struggle to grab onto his brother for help quickly brought them both down into a cold, watery grave. Searchers subsequently retrieved Bob's body after just a few days of dragging the river. They didn't find Junior until about 2 weeks later, about 15 miles from the place where he had drowned. Junior and Bob Hollingsworth were both still young men. Junior was 32 years old. Bob was just 22. Bob and Jean had one child by this time, a son who they named Dale, who, like his father and his grandfather Grady, later chose to become a preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ and a pious lover of God and man. As for Junior Hollingsworth, he left behind 2 ex-wives, 2 sons, and 4 daughters. I was 14 years old at the time of the deaths of these 2 splendid first cousins, and I remember the event all too clearly. Family members gathered at Dewey's home each day and every evening to await news of the ongoing search for their bodies. Now, I'd known Bob pretty well, but I'd only really met Junior on 1 or 2 occasions as I was growing up. I remember being with my father the first time I ever saw Junior Hollingsworth, and I asked him, I said, "Daddy, who was that man?" "Oh, that was Junior Hollingsworth," Daddy said matter-of-factly. I thought to myself, he sure doesn't look like a Hollingsworth. Junior Hollingsworth had, nevertheless, left an indelible impression on my mind. He was a man who loved his adoptive family passionately and was willing to give his life without hesitation for the brothers and for the family that he loved. Now, I can't help but believe that Junior had a heart of pure gold and the courage of a lion, which surely earned him kudos in the sight of his Father in heaven. As for Bob, when I heard talk after the incident that Bob drowned because he was a weak swimmer and that he had panicked in the cold water, I remembered a time several years earlier when I was just a little boy at the Little River State Park, when Bob carried me out into the deep water on his strong teenage shoulders and brought me back to shore again. I never once doubted him. I could feel his strength. No, Bob Hollingsworth was not just a strong swimmer, he was a strong man. Surely one of God's elect. Now this all happened, over 60 years ago now. But it seems like only yesterday in the annals of Hollingsworth family history. When I ponder upon the event nowadays, I have no doubt that Junior Hollingsworth got to hear his little brother preach that sermon the following week, right on schedule.